letter from the Gantry.
As always, thank you, Neil. Nottingham Forest won, Manchester City 0, a result which made plenty of recent noise, but for me, the resonance was an echo of the past, 35 years earlier, in fact, almost to the day. Back then, the Premier League was still a couple of years away. Unlike the more recent clash with European qualification on the mind of both clubs, Forest against Manchester City on the 3rd of March 1990 only had implications at the other end of the table. City needed points to stay in the old First Division. The match-winning moment came in the 53rd minute and changed the laws of the game. The City goalkeeper, Welsh international Andy Dibble, completed an awkward take from a right-wing cross from Forest's Gary Parker. He then looked upfield to see whether a counter-attack was on, letting the ball rest on the upturned palm of his gloved right hand. From behind him, unspotted, came Gary Crosby, the Forest forward, who flicked the ball off the hand with his head, the move of an artful dodger. Gary would admit later that it was simply a spontaneous reaction to the situation. He saw that Andy Dibble was not gripping the ball. Having nodded it away from the keeper, Crosby then tapped it into an empty net. From the Gantry, I felt lucky to have seen it. In those moments, a commentator might, like a keeper, look upfield to see what might be on for a counter-attack, or even take a glance at a note. But I saw the moment, audacious or unlawful, depending on your point of view, very clearly. More importantly, so did the television director Tony Mills, who would over 2 decades later mastermind the brilliant pictures surrounding that Sergio Aguero title-winning goal, Manchester City again, but on the right end of events that memorable day. If you haven't seen the cheeky Crosby moment, check it out online. Tony covered it perfectly. The referee, Roger Gifford, awarded the goal immediately, correctly to my mind, applying the laws as they stood then. There was no contact from the attacker on the keeper, who was not in full possession of the ball. A Welsh referee, as Roger was, saw no grounds to spare the embarrassment of a fellow countryman. That it was the only goal of the game made it more galling for the losing manager Howard Kendall and for his players. But the lawmakers did see it as an example of a loophole that needed closing. Later, they also outlawed putting a foot up to try to block an imminent clearance. There is a ring fence of law protection around goalkeepers these days. Gary Crosby was playing for Brian Clough that day. In the team was Brian's son, Nigel, and the two became firm friends. Nigel and Gary have formed a manager-coaching partnership for many years at several clubs, currently at Mansfield Town. Andy Dibble had no hard feelings, by the way. Later, only a few months later, donating that fateful glove to a testimonial fund raising money for the Forest keeper in that game, Steve Sutton. For Gary Crosby, 35 years later, read Callum Hudson-Odoi, the architect of the recent Forest win. While coaching at both Hampton and Richmond and at Woking, I came across Callum's older brother, Bradley, a strong running winger too, also with an eye for goal. When his commitments permitted, Callum would come and offer family support. There was a playoff home game for Hampton, I think against Truro. Bradley scored twice, and I can still see the two of them celebrating at the final whistle. Bradley then stopped playing soon after to manage Callum in the big-time football world he'd burst into. A final thought for a man who captained Nottingham Forest in the Crosby game and should have been at the City Ground to commentate on the Hudson-Odoi winner. Instead, Stuart Pearce was in a hospital in Newfoundland after a health scare flying back from a trip from Las Vegas, a trip where he was watching rugby league, which is trying to spread its wings, of course. Stuart supports, amongst his football love, Warrington Wolves. He is unarguably one of the great guys in the football world. If you saw him play or have listened to him broadcast, you'll know that already. As someone who went from non-league football to a World Cup semi-final, he cares deeply about the game from top to bottom. The Forest fans showed their love for him after 3 minutes against City, 3, of course, Stuart's iconic shirt number. One suspects also that it was one more incentive for the players on the day to get those 3 points. By the time you hear this, he will probably be back home and on the mend, and knowing the great man, quickly back on the air. From the joy of football, our fondest wishes, Stuart.